So, for context, I said inside of the notes of our meeting today, Spider-Man hands and invisible line, and gave John no context. What would you reckon that refers to? Either Spider-Man hand or invisible lines. Obviously, you know what the other notes are, so it's somewhat related, but
Well, if I when I think about Spider-Man hands, I kind of think like that, like the
yeah,
yeah.
the
That's
pointing your fingers out.
about it's fascinating. I'm not sure. I don't have I'm like I could grasp some places, but there isn't really a very yeah.
You're getting close-ish. So think about, so for everyone listening, I have embodied instruction as another point, and Spider-Man hands actually relates to the idea of embodied instruction and analogies, which is the first word that I have up there.
Oh, I thought the Spider-Man hands and the invisible lines were analogy.
They're analogies. Well, Spider-Man hands more than the invisible line, but they relate to embodied instruction, mainly through coaching or education or whatever word you want to put there. So in trampoline, right? When
Right, right. You're gonna give me something.
me Spider-Man hands, I mean grasping, yeah.
I suppose, yeah. I always just see those like that Spider-Man hands.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. But they're sticky. It was the
Oh, yeah, no, I can see what you're saying now.
yeah. So
No, I don't think I would have got there.
no. That's why I'm telling you. Basically, in trampoline, there are certain positions that you want a person to be in because of the way that it's judged. So it's not explicit. You have to have your arms here, you have to have your legs there, but they try and keep straight lines. So if you want your arms by your side, that's a straight line with the body. You want your arms above your head, that's a straight line with the. It's trying to make it look nice from the side. And a lot of people, when they're learning to do shape jumps, so tuck jump, straddle jump, pike jumps, that's legs together or legs apart, when they're learning to do those things they put those legs in the positions and then their arms are flailing all over the place. Most of the time you see them on the garden trampoline, their arms are all over the place. And I could say, keep your arms to your body, or you need to put your arms in this place, then this place, and this place. And that's normally what the instructions are. It's you put your arms above your head, then you touch your shins or legs or wherever in the shape, and then you put your arms down by your side. And most people struggle with that. They struggle following those instructions.
Mhm.
So what I did last Saturday was I asked one of the boys, I think he's eight, 8 or 9. I said to him, "Okay, can you clap with your hands above your head before you do the shape jump to get his arms up?" So he did that. He clapped, and because he's a gymnast, gymnasts do the opposite. So in trampoline, once you've done your shape, you put your arms down. In gymnastics, once you've done your shape, you put your arms up. So his attractor state is I touch my knees, then I put my arms up in the air. And he kept doing that. No matter how many times the other coaches had said, put your arms down by your side, it just it wasn't working for him. You need to put your arms by your side. You need to follow your legs. It just wasn't working for him. Spider-Man hands. So I said to him, imagine you're Spider-Man and your hands get stuck to your legs. After that one analogy, he did it 4 times in a row. He spent the last 4 or 5 months struggling to put his arms down from explicit instruction. Put your arms down, put your arms down. You need to put your arms down after the shape. I say Spider-Man hands, and now you've got sticky hands, and he does it 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
That to me is an embodied instruction. How does that different? How is that different from an explicit instruction? Instead of it being words of how to move, it's a feeling. He can think about what it would feel to have sticky hands on the legs.
Yeah.
And so when when his mum, who's the other person on the trampoline, said, "Oh, do it the gymnastics way," he did it that way. And what he said, I was like, "Yes." He said, "That doesn't feel right." And I'm like, "Wait, this thing you've been doing for the last 4.5, 5 months doesn't feel right after 4 attempts at doing it with Spider-Man hands." That means that the Spider-Man hands instruction was a feeling. It was an embodied instruction. He felt what it was that I wanted him to do in his body. It wasn't me telling him words and instructions to follow. He felt what it meant to have Spider-Man hands doing this shape jump. And when he did it the gymnastics way, it felt wrong because it didn't feel like Spider-Man's hands to him. That to me is so powerful. I don't know whether anyone else can grasp that, but that's huge.
Yeah, that is pretty big. Just that sudden change of like, oh no, I don't like that anymore. A thing you've been doing for multiple months, and all of a sudden, no,
It doesn't feel right.
that's really cool.
I'm not exaggerating. From one instruction, it was just it came to me while I was thinking, okay, how do I give this person an instruction, a constraint, um, to bring their arms down without actually telling them to bring their arms down? Because what I figured out is that you can clap above your head to get your hands up. That's simple. We got that bit sorted. And then I reduced the constraint. So instead of clapping, it's just touching your hands, and then adding more constraints. Now do it with straight arms, so straight arms touch your hands, and it looked pretty much as you would want it to look like as a trampolinist. But I didn't tell them you need to put your arms up and straight and fingers, and yeah, no, he figured that out. I guided him through constraints, but how to do that going down without saying put your arms down. That's the question I asked myself as an educator using the constraints-led approach and taking an ecological approach.
Mm.
How do I guide him to do something without telling him to do it using a constraint, an analogous constraint analogy? And the Spider-Man hands is what I came up with. And it worked. Straight away, I was like, what? It was that easy. I mean, it wasn't easy, but the language shift, that to me is interesting to see how we can then use that language shift, the questions that the educators look to ask themselves for guidance, and shifting, okay, what am I going to say to this individual to help guide them in any
So
context?
does that, if we kind of zoom out a little bit, is the constant conversation around the brain, my brain is a problem, my brain is that is almost an analogous constraint because there is an assumed constraint because the brain is not operating
I would say that
correctly.
that's the learned that's the learned symbolic traditional sort of language. My brain is the problem. I don't think there's a feeling to that. There is a feeling associated with the behaviors that you bring from that. But I don't think when I think about my brain as the problem, I don't have any feeling for that apart from maybe frustration that I can't do certain behaviors. But that's
Yeah.
not linked to the brain being the problem. That's linked to my own assumptions of the feeling of doing something or feeling of not being able to do something. And that's
Mm,
why I've always struggled with my brain is the problem, because it's not my brain. It's me and me with other things. Organism
mm,
environment relationship is how I would describe it using the ecological terms. But I don't, similar with the boy, like put your arms down. Why? What does that mean? I don't know what that feels like. Your brain is the problem. Why? Like for me, I'm like, why? I don't see how that's a problem. Whereas when you would say something that's embodied, i.e., you probably don't feel attracted to doing this behavior. Well, no, I don't. Because it's a feeling. You feel attracted or not attracted to certain behaviors. Well, I don't want to do that thing. That thing's boring because my brain doesn't have the capacity to do that. I don't feel that.
mm,
That I don't feel that, oh, I'm bored because my brain doesn't have the capacity to hold all of these elements in my working memory. No, that
mm.
to me isn't an embodied feeling. My embodied feeling is I don't have the energy to do that right now. So
Yeah.
why don't you have the energy to do that right now? Well, there are too many opportunities for me.
Mm,
That to me is an embodied explanation, an ecological explanation of my feeling at that point in time, rather than saying, oh, I don't have the working memory capacity. No, that to me isn't an embodied feeling. An embodied feeling is I don't have the energy to do that right now because there are too many opportunities.
mm.
And how do we adjust that? By adding a constraint
Yeah.
to the environment to help self-organize for goal-directed behavior, which is what we do in the ecological approach, which is Spider-Man hack. Yeah, yeah. And using those embodied instructions I borrowed that term from Julia when I was speaking with her about language and lecturing through the ecological approach is using those visual, not necessarily all visual as in I can see vision, but visual as in embodied. I don't know how to explain embodied without it being embodied. That's what I'm struggling with right now, because I want to say visual, but it's not only visual because it's also haptic. So it's an embodied feeling of the experience. How do you explain embodied without saying embodied and feeling? Because
Well, it's a feeling, isn't it? Really,
yeah,
it's just a
because traditional language say, "Oh yeah, I can see that now." You,
yeah.
you can't just see it; you can also feel it. You can perceive it.
Mm,
But yeah, so embodied instruction. That's what I've been thinking about a lot this week.
mm,
And I feel like embodied instruction is what we tend to use through the constraints-led approach and talking ecologically and taking an ecological approach. It's, yes, we're adding constraints, but I feel like those constraints are more embodied than traditional constraints, task constraints added by educators. So maybe embodied constraints are what we're looking to lean towards rather than traditional task constraints. What are you thinking?
So when it comes to the traditional task constraints, that's the kind of direct instruction. That's the put your hands by your side versus going for the feeling, which is
Depends who you're talking to. That could be direct instruction or explicit.
oh, for fuck's sake, it's the same thing. Telling someone what to do versus it's almost like how to get a feeling.
So
It's kind of like
it
you
sounds
want
like
to
you're
feel like
struggling.
this.
It sounds like you're struggling. What bit do you see you struggling with?
I don't know what the struggling is. I'm just trying to perceive the differences,
Okay,
feel the
between
differences
yeah,
between the direct instruction and the kind of
embodied instruction.
bodied instruction. Yeah.
So for constraints, when I think about task constraints, you can constrain to the point where there is one answer. So it's heavily so there's a best technique. Then there's unconstrained, which is just you do what you want, when you want, how you
Yeah.
want. Which I mean, you can't really have an unconstrained sport because sport has play by.
Yeah.
But there are the nude game, as it were, in Brazil, or jumpers for goalposts, football, where you put your jumpers down on the floor, there's your goals, and go play. No lines, no referee, no coach, no hits, and you can have uneven numbers of teams, like highly unconstrained games, but still constrained to an extent. So constraints is what we all use. But the constraints-led approach, most of the time, is where you add a constraint that encourages self-organization. But those constraints could still look and feel the same as ones don't. Like you can still say only go at this part of the pitch, or you have to put your arms by your sides, or you have to keep your arms straight. The instruction, the wording of the instruction is still very symbolic, I guess, like abstract. It's if you don't fully, if I was to say to you and you not know the context of trampoline, and I say you need to keep your arms by your side,
Why?
yeah,
It's uncomfortable.
precisely. There's no there's no implicit reason or feeling as to why you would do that.
Mm.
So
So it's almost finding the feeling in
hmm,
the constraint, would you say?
I think so, yeah. Like what the constraint feels like when you
Mm.
try to execute it.
Because that's what because as I was kind of going through, so I watched our episode last week around like the marketing piece of like how do I describe what I do without one using all of the language because that is terrifying to most people and the jargon is a lot. Although I very much because I put in the task constraints, individual constraints, environmental constraints into just my notes, and the first thing my friend did was like, "Oh, they're really interesting. I want to put them into the website." And I'm like, Fascinating. Okay. And I was like,
You can
maybe
reference
not.
Snore's work.
And so I was like, cool. And then as I was going through, I was just like, I was trying to feel it out and just figure out, okay, what would this like if I was just to talk about the process, and I'm remembering as I was talking, oh, it's here, cool. It was very much like the process versus the results. It's the you know what you want, but you're struggling getting there. You're not sure what you want. You need help. Like all of it was very feelings based as I was going through. Whereas a lot of as I'm thinking about it, a lot of the marketing copy in business is direct instruction versus feeling.
Feeling
It's like
instruction.
you want this. You'll do this to get this. It's a feeling instruction. Whereas a lot, so it's like we all know that there isn't a one size fits all solution to business, life, etc., etc. So why do we think there is? Because that's the first point of like most they tell you what or how to do it, and not the bit in the middle, which is kind of the language that that has emerged from these conversations. Because it's like because most business coaches just tell you what to do.
Mm. There's no one best technique.
Mm.
I mean, that's literally how we learn to move. It's the first chapter of Rob Gray's book, How We Learn to Move. There's no one best technique, and it applies to most most situations, most sectors, including business. What's interesting to me when you speak about feeling and a feeling instruction is feelings are embodied. And that's how we would
Yeah.
discuss cognition. Cognition not as some mental representation, computation that happens separate in the central executive, cognition as something embodied that we can feel with the interaction between our body and the environment.
It reminds me, as I was going through kind of writing this sales page, get this homepage, writing it out, getting that, embodying it and feeling it out.
Feeling it out, exactly.
Yeah, well, as I was feeling it out, I suddenly just had this moment of, oh, that's why our AI is such a non thing.
It is a thing.
Well, yeah, it's a thing, but it's also it's a tool which has some benefit, but can it there's a lot of scaremongering and fear around AI of taking over jobs and taking over all of this and taking over all of that. And I'm like, but if you are computing your answers in business, then yes, buy. But the moment you embody your business, not a chance. AI at their current stage cannot embody, which is why trying to get a copy for my website is just almost impossible because it can't embody.
But so this is what Julia and I actually spoke about recently, is that AI, with the current models that with the current science and models, computer science, the way that it's working at the moment, it is all computation. And what was
Mm,
interesting is Julia was saying that a lot of the computer scientists that she's spoken to recently actually think ecologically about computer AI. They're trying to use the ideas from ecological psychology to make AI more embodied, more enacted within the way that it functions. But because science doesn't approach research ecologically, they're stuck. They don't know where to go.
fascinating.
So she actually gave a computer scientist her book, Introduction to Ecological Psychology, recently because he had come across a Ford, thought, oh, I think we perceive with affordances, but I don't know. And Julia was like, here's my book.
Read my book.
Yeah. So the computer scientists that are trying to develop AI to be more human-like are looking, some of them at least, are looking into ecological psychology to make them more embodied, to encompass some of the embodied interactions we have within the environment with their processing, their program, because they recognize that's a limitation of AI. AI is computation. And if we as humans treat ourselves as computation, as niche construction, then yeah, our jobs will get overtaken because computers are better at computation than humans because humans don't do it. Humans are embodied. We are better with embodied cognition, the feelings of something. A word to me, if a robot puts a string of words together, it might not embody the same sort of experience as when a human, or if a human were to write it, even if the words potentially are the same, the background story from the individual may actually change the way that someone perceives the same words. It's the same with the staircase study. The participants, for those unfamiliar, participants were told to go up a staircase. One group were given water at the top. One group were given a sugary drink at the top, so like an energy drink. And the group that got the energy drink at the top perceived the staircase as steeper, as like requiring more energy to go up the stairs, even though the staircase was exactly the same. So what the person was told they would get at the end changed how difficult they perceived the task. And when we look at the words on a screen, I would associate it very, very similar. If you see the same words on the screen, but your prior knowledge, you're exposed to information about who or what wrote it, it's going to change how you perceive those words. Maybe you feel differently because a human has written those words, or you think a human has written those words at least.
Hmm.
And that to me is where embodied cognition, non-linear, non-obvious multi-causality through ecological psychology, you look at it and go, oh, all these things could be related or potentially are related in some causal way through cascade modeling, which is what we've spoken about. It's scales of measurements. It's not, I pick out this little slot and go, yep, that's my experience. No, it's it's embodied throughout time, throughout multiple time scales. I recognize there's a lot of jargon in that.
Yes, a
How
lot of jargon.
how would you unpack that, John? Unpack that for the audience.
Unpack that. I quite like. I saw this in our group chat of like the non-obvious causality. Yeah, non-obvious causality. That's the stuff that often is portrayed as the mental model. It's the stuff we can't see, so is our mental thing. That was what I saw in the chat earlier, and I was like, that's interesting. Like, I'm not entirely sure what I feel about it, but I can see where that's coming from because often there are things we cannot see. There is stuff that happens we just don't know what causes what. You've got the kind of the bird that when they crack one way, they kind of go one way, and that changes everything. The butterfly effect.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting you say that what causes what. Just by you saying what causes what makes it sound like it's chain-like, sounds like it's
Yeah, no,
linear.
that's true, but it's not, is it? It just happens.
Well, it doesn't just happen. There are causes, but they're multiple, non-linear, non-obvious causes. It's table legs to a behavior at the top or an experience
Mm,
at the top. And there could be thousands of table legs, and one small table leg could topple it. That's the butterfly effect.
mm,
Instead of what causes what, cause and effect. Are there big significant causes? Yes. Without it, other things wouldn't happen. But for that one thing to happen, there will likely be other causes. Just because I've picked up the pen, there are multiple causes involved in that. The most significant cause would be my movement, my grabbing of the pen. But if I'm not sitting in this room, I'm not there to pick the pen up. If the pen wasn't already there, then I wouldn't be able to pick the pen up. Like the non-obvious causes of things that are just happening around. Non-obvious causes being this conversation.
mm.
It's not obvious that you nodding your head might relate to me picking the pen up. How do we test for that? Well, now you need a scale of measurement. Where do you pick the scale of measurement? Is it that 1 second that I saw your head nod, or is it the minute that we've been having this conversation? Is it the whole conversation we've been having? Is it the fact that this pen is on my desk because I went to a conference last week because that's where I got the pen from? Is that a cause for this pen being picked up? Well, arguably yes, because if I didn't go to the
Yeah,
conference, I wouldn't I wouldn't have the pen to pick up. So
it's
where do you put your scale of measurement?
yeah, the scale and measurements thing has been really helpful. One of the things that I got a lot of kickback with when using kind of the ecological, and it was my language talking about the brain as not being as important as it's made to be. And it's like, yeah, but I do genuinely have these problems. Okay, cool. That's okay. They are problems. I am not denying, and there was that resistance from a client around that. I like, well, I said, of course you do. I am not for 1 second denying the problem because that's why you're here.
Yep.
But and
Or
one of the things
perceived
that I'm
problem at
shifting in
least.
my, yeah, the language that I'm trying to shift is away from the brain being like, I've gone like, no, brain, no, can we stop talking about the brain? Because there is like, because we are so, you know, the fractal
Constrained.
is so tiny. And so I'm like, can we talk about more than the brain, please?
Yes.
But I haven't made that as clear
What do you mean?
when during my speaking. It's like, oh no, we don't talk about the brain because the brain is not the thing versus it's part of the thing,
Ah, so you're trying to add explicit instruction to not talk about the brain?
pretty much.
Ah, yeah, no, that's
Ah,
that's
Well, I don't know whether I'm adding explicit instructions, but I am adding explicit instructions to me.
you're
I am
adding a
explicitly
constraint to your
going,
language.
yeah, I'm adding a constraint to my language, which I think is not.
It would, I mean, this is where I feel development is just, it is part of development. You're
Yeah,
developing language. You're trying to work out what constraints are effective for your language.
yeah,
Language is behavior, it's communication with other individuals through words, as
yeah.
we would describe them. So you're adding constraints, and then you need to adjust the constraints
Mm,
as you develop your expertise. So for me,
yeah.
I was the same. When I first started speaking about ecological psychology, mainly the constraints-led approach, I stopped referring to the brain entirely. I was like, nope,
Mm.
nope. Yes, the brain is involved, but I don't want to talk about it. The
Because
brain
everybody
isn't.
else talks about it. Let's talk about something else.
Yeah, but this is where embodied. We're talking
Yeah,
about embodied cognition. We're not talking about computational brain
yeah.
cognition. We're talking about
Embodied.
embodied.
Yeah,
We've got the body and the brain, because the body includes the brain, plus environment. Like with environment, it's not, oh, the environment, this thing that we're just situated in for our computation to happen. No, 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 no.
right.
It's embodied.
Yeah, it's part and parcel of the whole story. But we're so like,
Like David wrote in his flow paper, which is one of the video essays that I'm working on at the moment, is that towards the end of the paper, the traditional cognitive meta theory approaches of explaining flow is all internal. Flow is internal. It's in you. It's in your brain. It's in the dopamine. It's in your reward system. It's all interfocused. But if flow, like focus and attention, works through embodied cognition with the relationship between us and the environment, then it needs to be externally driven. One of the examples that David said while we were talking is that if you walk into a road and suddenly a bus flies past you, you go, oh, wow, there was a bus. You wouldn't do the, oh, wow, there's a bus there if you didn't look externally. Like if you weren't in a relationship with the bus, you wouldn't have gone, oh no, I shouldn't do that. So the bus plays an important role with your behavior, with your attention, your focus. If you're not paying attention to the road and the cars on the road, you're going to get hit. So you pay attention to the cars on the road. But if the cars on the road aren't there, you're not paying attention to it. And it's the
yeah,
same with flow. It's the same with any sort of focus that you're coupled with the environment, perceiving for action with things in the environment, not just internal. It's everything. It's combined flow being and a relationship between the organism and the environment.
have you got that paper? Is that a paper?
It's an academic paper. Yeah, David posted it. I think he shared it about a month ago now. It's
On my list. I'm gonna look. I want
it's
that
the,
paper.
it's
I want to look.
the flow and the flow state stuff.
The
Uh,
flow and the flow state stuff with flowy flow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've recorded video and things. It is called "Why Isn't Flow Flowing? Meta-theoretical Issues in Explanations of Flow." I will copy and
I
paste that.
really like that title.
I'm going to copy and paste it into the Zoom chat. For those listening in, I'm going to read it out slower again. Why isn't flow flowing? Mark. Meta-theoretical issues in explanations of flow. There you go.
I don't know why I like that so much, but it was just I did really enjoyed that a little bit. Actually.
What? Why flow isn't flowing?
Yes, just like
Yeah, I mean, it's not a, oh, I'll just casually read that on the sofa while I'm watching whatever on TV. It's a, oh, damn, this is an ecological paper and we're talking about maths. I mean, some of the quotes that come out of it are very jargon heavy, but if you're familiar with the terminology, you could probably get through it quite easy. And I do have a video essay coming out at some point in the next month about it as well. So if you don't want to read the paper and get confused, then tune into the channel.
I was like, just tune into the channel. It's fine.
Yeah, but yeah, so but that's the Spider-Man hands. That's where the topics that emerge from Spider. The next one was the invisible line. Now, this relates to maths. I spoke with a guy called Dor Abrahams or Abrams. I can't remember how his last name's spelt. But yeah, and he looks at taking an ecological approach to maths and maths being embodied, maths being embedded within the environment that we are developing our understanding in, right?
Yes.
So it's not follow algorithm to get answer in math. It is understanding the embodied concept of mathematical relationship. Yeah, adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
This is something that I am constantly teased in one of my old D&D groups. Whenever I am working out, like, so I roll the dice, you add a modifier, or like when I count up, I add rather than subtract whenever my creatures get attacked, whenever the creatures get attacked, because it's easier to add up than it is to take away for me. So I'm always doing this, like counting. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm like, and everyone's like, why do you do that? I said, because otherwise I won't count and I'll miss stuff. And everyone's like, oh, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I'm like, then count it on your fingers. And that's why I do it, because otherwise it's not happening.
But that's the thing, and that's one of the things that I'm intrigued to hear more about when we're talking, when we're taking an ecological approach to maths, is there is this emphasis on mental maths of doing everything in your head, this calculations in your head. Yeah, but why? What are you actually doing in your head to do the mental maths? Because I know for me, when I did my mental times tables and learnt them at school, when I did my 9 times tables, I was thinking about I don't know whether you know the trick, but if you hold your hands out and you fold a thumb, you've got 9. So that's 1 times 9. If you go 2, so you put your second digit down, you've got 1 and then 8. So 18, 27, 36, 45, 54. That's how I learned my 9 times tables. It was an embodied understanding of the 9 times tables, multiplication and adding.
It's so interesting because I during my perusal of TikTok, I'm seeing all of these really cool ways of doing numbers and maths and stuff. And I'm saying, yeah, I love all these things, like with the little dots to help you figure out all of that. Like, yeah, but how am I supposed to do that in life? Do I grab a whiteboard? So I go, okay, hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just a minute. 7, 8. That's £10.70, please. 1, 2, 3. Like, and I'm just sat there going, that doesn't make sense. I like it. It's cool, but how does that help me to
do stuff?
Yeah. It's just a cool little idea to prepare people for their exams. Are you going to sit in the exam and go, no, you don't have the time.
This is what intrigues me about Dawes' work, is so when looking at addition, typically things get bigger. Subtraction, things get smaller. So if you're adding a weight to something, things get heavier, things get lighter. Heavier, lighter, bigger, smaller. They're descriptions for the understanding of addition and subtraction. It's the concept of addition. Even if you don't speak the same language, how do you explain addition? Well, 1 and 1 is 2. You visually show things getting bigger. Subtraction, you visually show with your body them getting smaller. How do you visually show multiplication? How do you visually show proportion? That's what he's looking into. And one of the studies that he's looking at for proportion, i.e. ratios, is if we use the screen, this is what he uses. So we put your hands like the bottom of the screen. I can't really do this because I'm like it's like freaking huge. I'm like all the way over there. But you've got the up bit of the screen and then the bottom bit. And if you have a proportion, you go up by 2, across by 3, there is a certain ratio that you would move your hands to keep yourself in line with that ratio. If you go up by too much, well, now it's the wrong ratio. It's not following the constraint, the rules. And he did this activity by trying to follow this ratio with various people. And what do you when you see me do that, how would you embody that? How would you explain that embodied experience of me moving my hands? Are you visualizing anything? Visualizing anything?
Yeah.
What
I'm seeing kind of as you're kind of going like that, I'm almost seeing two lines as a grid and then like the points where they meet and visualizing almost that.
So the points where they meet, explain that a little bit more.
So as it's moving, I can kind of see. So if I'm doing it here, I can
Mhm.
see this. So I can kind of, I'm actually seeing the squares as I'm going out. I'm seeing every time that the squares meet. And when it doesn't, I'm like, oh, that needs to go further. Oh, okay, cool.
I'm so glad you did that because this is what Dor did with his research, and this is why it's so cool to see this in maths, is you've explained it through drawing essentially 2 lines to make a dot. Yeah?
Mm.
I don't. I see an invisible line between my hands,
Oh, interesting.
and that's a triangle. Because I've got the hypotenuse of the triangle, you've got the 2 other sides of the triangle. So we are seeing 2 different ways to do it.
I love
But
that.
but other people see other ways to visualize it. Some people go from the corner, so where my finger started, and they draw a line like perpendicular to the invisible line that I'm drawing. So there are different ways of understanding proportion and this relation through
As I
explanation.
as I was also doing that one as I was kind of like going through it. I was seeing multiple things, and then I decided on that one. I'm like, because I was also seeing a line going up. I was like, oh, I was kind of seeing that one too at the same time.
So
But I was
there's
not seeing the other thing that you were saying. That's so fascinating. It's
exactly.
really
And I'm like, this is
fascinating.
so cool. And Dor gave me other examples of different experiments that they've done where he's asked someone to explain how they would embody the explanation. And they came up with loads of things like getting bigger, getting smaller, other variables changing, and some people doing something completely different. And one of the examples that he was saying is with multiplication. I think it was multiplication. How would you sort of like show this? Well, one thing can get bigger and smaller, etc., with these graphs. And he spoke with a mathematician, and the mathematician said, "Oh no, all I'm doing, so instead of it, so when you get bigger, you go times by 2, and your hands go up by whatever the difference is, right? So times by 3, times by 4. And what this mathematician did is said, no, this one's not getting like twice as big as this one or twice as small as this one. That's not what's happening. He had a dot on the far right, and he was drawing a line, and he said it's got to be there. So he had a relationship with the line going with multiplication. So instead of being 2 times and half, he had a line going up. And I'm like, where in the world did you visualize that from? But that's how he is understanding multiplication through this embodied explanation. And I was
Ooh.
like, what? So when we say, oh, you just do this, no, because just doing this means their understanding of that relationship is different. And if there are issues with that understanding of the relationship, i.e., instead of the line being cemented, so between my 2 hands, let's use that one because I feel like that one's easier to visualize for those listening. I've got my hands, they're going from together, a right hand, like an angle, and then one goes up and one goes across. And there's an invisible line between my hands, between my fingers.
Hmm.
That there, how did you get there? That explanation is an embodied explanation of something that doesn't exist, but we can all we can all imagine this invisible line, and that relationship relates to proportion. How can you then educate individuals about mathematics and proportion through this invisible line instead
That's
of
really cool.
ratios? Oh, two four is the same as 2 1, or is half like fractions. Half is bigger than a quarter, but 2 is smaller than 4. How does that make sense? Well, how do you then embody fractions? It's proportion, it's ratios. And he's done this as well with trigonometry, sine and cosine. How do you get a sine wave and a cosine wave to work? For those unfamiliar with maths, then maybe this goes well above you, but sine and cosine waves can be mapped onto graphs. And so you can have an embodied relationship between sine and cosine because there are invariants, there are attractors. Sine goes from, like, if you've got a line, you've got like where it's hitting the line, it goes up, then down, and then below, and then up. Obviously, there are attractors where it crosses the line. So when you're trying to embody those reactions, well, I need to make sure that this hand hits this point at the same time this hand hits this point. And so you can model sine and cosine waves through embodied actions. That to me is so cool.
Yeah.
So instead of you looking at loads of answers of trigonometry, sine, cosine, angles, and graphs and things, you can actually imagine these invisible things through embodied explanations of the relationship of maths. That's so cool. It's not a, I need to do mental arithmetic to remember that. No, you don't need to do that. And what something Dor said that I really need to look into more is some of the best physicists and mathematicians embody their explanations of the math. They don't know the formulas, they don't know the symbols and the signs, but they have a thought experiment. They have a model. They have an embodied experience of the relationship. Then they try and explain the relationship, the embodied experience, through symbols, through math. So when you look at Gibson with invariance and the optic array, he had embodied experiences being on the back of trains and seeing things fly past.
Mm.
That's the embodied understanding of mathematical relationships within an optic array. And then he modeled that through maths and physics, sort of. Similar with Einstein and Newton and all the physicists, they experience something, they have an embodied experience, an explanation of some relationship, then they explain it through symbols, math. But we teach the symbols first and then expect embodied understanding to happen. That to me is such a cool revelation in the way that we could be educating people about mathematical steps. And when
Yeah.
I think back to my times tables, how did I know my times tables? I knew the fives, I knew the tens, I knew the nines, I knew the ones and twos, but anything that I didn't have an embodied explanation of or embodied relationship to, I struggled with.
Yeah.
Sevens. Eights.
Yeah, no.
I don't know.
Yeah, no.
Eights. How did I get to the eights? I doubled the fours. How did I get to the fours? I doubled the twos. How did I get to the twos? Well, that's just twice as big. What's that? Proportion. Proportion is, oh, this is this much bigger than this. I
Yeah.
had an embodied explanation of the twos, and I just mapped that to the fours and then the eights. Seven. What in the world is a seven? How would you map the sevens? How would you get an embodied explanation of 7 times tables?
I don't know.
This is what I mean. Teachers don't teach this sort of stuff. They just go, oh, well, it's 7, 14, 21, 28, blah, blah, blah.
That's so interesting. I need to know more about this myself now.
So this is Invisible Line and Spider-Man embodied instruction.
That's so cool.
Why can't people talk about this stuff? I mean, maybe everyone else, maybe some people have just like gone, oh yeah, this is boring and left. But for me, this is exciting. I'm like, yes, let's talk more.
Yeah, yeah. This also reminds me, moving it back to business, of an experience I had recently, where the practitioner, facilitate.
Go through the list of
sharing. Yeah, I'm trying to find the right, because it's not coach. Sorry, I'm not actually, because it's not. Where the facilitator was sharing their approach and was like, and there was a group in there, and they were like, how do you organize this? How do you like figure out where all these things go? And their reaction made me a little bit sad. It was, oh, I don't. It's just one, it's all in my head. And I'm like, oh.
Well, they're not wrong
I guess
because
not.
because it is in their head, but it's not all in their
Yeah,
head.
is it, but it's all chaos in there, so I just do it, and I'm like, right, okay, fine, you just do it. Yeah, of course you just do it. I know. Guide them, provide a constraint, do
Something.
because all it is that it was chaos. It was like, oh, it's just chaos and it just happens. I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't work. The I'm sorry, hang on, let me rephrase. It is not very effective. It is ineffective because people are like, okay, great, so it's chaos. So I just have to like that is overwhelming because they are not attuned to the same information that this other person is because they created this whole thing. And I confused the crap out of them, I think, or just they didn't care. Because like
Who?
the person. Because I was there
Oh,
like,
the educator.
do you like some do you want me to create some resources to help with that? Like to help with figuring it out and bringing that and it was like, what? I'm like, oh, this is why I need to do my business because this is the stuff that I like. This is the stuff. It's like, okay, cool. You're being told and instructed on what to do. Fine, cool. Let's take this strategy now. This is the fun bit. You wish to implement this strategy. How are we going to do it? Oh, I don't know. I'll just follow the step-by-step guide. Okay, cool. Cool then. Oh, but this isn't working. Okay, cool. Why? Let's go play. Because then you really start to see what when you look at business owners who are successful, however you define success, whatever those measures are, but like the metric here is lots of money, lots of popularity, lots of this, lots of that. Like when you look at how, it's because they do things their way. They're not telling other people how to do stuff. They're not doing what other people tell them to do. They're figuring it out. They're fucking around and finding out.
They're doing what everyone else is trying to do, but they have found success. They found something that has worked. And most of the time they just double down on what it is
Yeah.
that has worked. But what I find interesting about a lot of businesses is they they are selling what didn't work for them.
I know.
It's
It's
like
infuriating.
it's like, hey, here's all the mistakes I've made. Don't make these mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they need to make
No
mistakes to
one's
figure
talking
out.
about those mistakes. Everyone is too busy just going, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. Yeah, but that works. So I'm not supposed to do it now because it works? Oh, just do less. I was trying to do too many things at once, so I just started doing less. I'm like, I can't do any less. If I do any less, I'll be doing nothing. Because the thing you're telling me to do less of, I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's why kind of my business has taken the turn that it's turning, because I realize that is what is missing from so much of the content and the business teaching and the tutoring and the training.
Yep.
It's that piece of like, okay, so here's the strategy you have to follow step by step. What happens when it doesn't work?
I'm curious, how would you suggest for educators to educate ecologically within business? Because obviously that's what you're looking to do. And if there
Yeah.
isn't a step-by-step instruction or template to follow and avoid these mistakes and all that sort of stuff, how would you educate ecologically in business?
Unfortunately, it's non-scalable. I don't think it's scalable. I think it is much more interaction between the individuals than is currently being done in most of the program. It is looking because having an overarching kind of plan is not a bad thing. It's helpful to have a direction, but I think it's almost stepping away from well, it's not directly instructing people for one, obviously. It's not like do this, this is the only way. And for some, they're like, this is what feels good for me. This is what feels good for me. I want to hear why. Like more explorations of the why it feels good. What like the details that they leave out. And why this versus this? Why that versus that? What is it about this approach that fits? Because then once you get there, you go, oh, yeah, no, I don't have that experience. Okay, cool. That's kind of what I'd love to see. And I think there needs to be more coaches coaching, not in.
But for the people that do find success, though, how would you explain their success? Like them following exact instructions and then they find success. Admittedly, I don't see many of them, but for those that
I
do
don't
find
know
the
whether there
success,
is. I don't think. I do not believe that people have followed exact instructions of success. I don't think they followed it verbatim. I think they have adapted it and they have changed it and they have twisted what they are learning to suit them. And half the time they don't get it right, and then the other half the time they do get it right. But no one talks about the things they did wrong. They talk about the things they did right. But the if we are assuming a one way, which we can't because that does not no, just no, there is not one way. But anyway, like if we're assuming there is a right and wrong, but no one talks about the bits that went wrong, the why it didn't work, the why this, why it didn't work for them. And
the
that I
lessons
think
learned
is
along
what,
the way.
yeah, the lessons learned along the way is so much more interesting because it's like here are things that happen. Because that's a constant conversation around like for years I was trying to figure out how to price correctly. Like, how do I price my work? And everyone's, oh, it's just a gut feeling. Some people saying it's a gut feeling. I said, yeah, well, what is the right gut feeling? And then there was it was very much, and this is something that this individual has done really well, and I like. It's like, well, it is a gut feeling. Pick one, start with one, and then see where like. Just pick it, do it, and then move forward. I'm like, yes, I like that. I like that. But
I
why did
feel
I
like
like?
I was going to say, I feel like the gut feeling, when people say, oh, it's intuition and it's a gut feeling, that
That's
is the
embodied.
non-obvious, yeah, that's the non-obvious
Yeah,
multilinear causality, non-linear causality that we would describe as
yeah.
embodied cognition. It's built up from experiences because you're not going to have a gut feeling of, oh, this is good or bad if you've never had experiences before about prices. If you're from a family or from a situation or you've grown up struggling with finances, I can't imagine many people going, oh yeah, I'm going to charge like $1 million an hour. No, because they're going to feel more connected with those that have struggled, so they are more likely to have a gut feeling for a lower value because they recognize the struggles some people have for accessibility. And
And that is one of the things for me that's why I decided to price lower than most coaches
mm,
because I could be charging two, three, four times as much and would probably get clients. Eh.
mm. And I mean, this
My
is this is one of those moral things as well when it comes to money, because even those people that do charge a lot don't like charging a lot. Like when you speak to them, they're like, it's a lot of money. But and then they go and say, but I need the money to keep the business going, or but I need the money for the upfront costs, or but I need the money because of XYZ. So
yeah, I have
it's a
I have worked with
navigation.
clients. I've worked with clients many times. They're like, oh, but I need to pay my contractors. I need to pay this. I need to pay that. And this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I say, yeah, but do you want to? No. Okay, don't then. Like, why are you doing it?
Comes back to why you want the business.
Yeah.
What's the business for? What value is the business trying to give? And this is where, for me, sports coaching, albeit not a lucrative profession to be in by any means, even if you are at the top level, you're probably going to be struggling to have a job if you lose a game. Uh, but the the value that I feel I can give back through sport is much more than doing stuff online, like the YouTube creator courses. There's loads of them out there. Loads of people do various versions, and they all do the same stuff. They all teach you the same pieces of information you can freely get online. Could I do that? Yes. Could I find success? Potentially. But do I perceive that as adding value to the world? I don't think so. And I guess this relates to what Julie was talking about in our conversation that we had recently as well about AI and teachers. If teachers are just giving the same pieces of information that an AI can spew out, what value is the teacher really adding? If you can ask any internet search engine, hey, what's the answer to this question, and it give you the correct answer, what value is the teacher giving to that student if the teacher's just giving them? I would argue not much. The educator should be adding more value. What does that value look like? I think in the world that we're living in right now is a critical thought, a critical eye. But then again, as you may have seen with the teacher that had that critical conversation, they lost their job. So who knows?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm referring to?
I don't think I am, no. I mean, I know of the story because there are plenty, but I don't.
There was a recent teacher that there was a recorded interaction. So a student asked them about J.K. Rowling and about what the teacher thought about the bigoted comments J.K. Rowling has made, and the teacher instead of sorry,
Hmm.
have you?
I've seen that video, yeah.
Yeah, so the teacher instead of responding used it as a thought experiment and said, okay, well, what do you mean by bigoted? Can you give me examples of bigoted, blah, blah, blah? And they went through this critical thought experiment, and the teacher lost their job. They got fired because we don't know it was because of that conversation, but it was pretty coincidentally timed. And they did a video about it explaining stuff. And I find it interesting that the critical thinking is being challenged. Like, do we not want people to critically?
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's going down a very questionable line, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So, irrespective of the topic of conversation, if we're not being critical, I mean, if you're critical about the ecological approach, do it.
Yeah.
Have a conversation.
Yeah.
About cognitive approach, do it. Have a conversation. Like whatever the topic is, whether it's politically charged or not, I would want to have those conversations. Whether you share those politically charged views and conversations online, that's where I think it gets questionable whether if it's a safe environment or not. And I would want schools to be a safe environment. Online, I think you're struggling to find safe environments to talk about certain topics,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. I would like it to be
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's that embodied feeling of, you shouldn't really say that. Or can I say that? Or what will other people say if I say this? And that's where the constraints of society adds to the way that we use language. We are free at the moment to speak ecologically, but maybe we become a bit fringe as Gibsonians,
Yeah.
radical Gibsonians.
Contrarians.
Yeah. I don't know whether that's a bad thing or not, but
Yeah.
what are you thinking?
It's not good or bad, it just is, isn't it, really? It's just,
Well, that's the way that we see it,
yeah.
but how it's the way it's perceived by others
Yeah.
and actions by others because of their perceptions of the way that our actions are
Yeah.
embodied. It's fun stuff. It gets very philosophical very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And people that deny that it's philosophy, I just facepalm. Oh, we don't do that philosophy stuff. Yeah, but you do. Every
Yeah.
time you communicate with someone, you're talking about philosophy because you have a philosophical approach to the way that you describe whatever it is that you're describing. So you can't say we don't do that philosophy stuff because you do. Whether it's implicit or explicit, you do philosophy.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anything else you want to add?
Don't think so.
Don't think so. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else want to talk about Spider-Man? I'm all open. My schedule's
Oh,
open.
yeah.
So,
We can talk more about Spider.
yeah. Right. Thank you everyone for listening.